Welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be diving a little bit more deeply into the characteristics of silence. And this is more than just defining a term, because as I outlined in the Why Practice video, practicing silence is less about chaining together behaviors. It's not the traditional skill building that we're used to when it comes to sports or trades. It's more about adopting a certain lens. Adopting that lens in moments where it's relevant, but still adopting a way of seeing things, adopting a way of relating to things. And so in order to adopt that lens, we really have to know what characteristics define it. And so today's video is about identifying those characteristics and giving a little bit more in-depth explanation around those characteristics to start to lay the stage for what that lens looks like. And so this first section of characteristics that I'm going to talk about, they're more esoteric. They're more kind of intangible. And for some of you, this is not going to resonate. And I encourage you, if this feels kind of blurry or inaccessible, don't feel obligated to iterate on it until you reach an understanding. If anything, I just encourage you almost to use these initial characteristics as reminders in your meditation practice, or just small reflections that you take in. And then the next section will be more about the applied characteristics, how they actually apply to your life. And so this first characteristic is that silence is simple, not complex. And the easiest way to describe this is that silence is like 0, as opposed to the other infinite numbers on the number line. And again, we're talking about silence as stillness, as emptiness, as kind of non-action, non-ego. And all of those boil down to something very simple. Not always easy, but characteristically simple. That doesn't mean that you're not going to hear silence applied to different scenarios. And my goal is to make this accessible, which means to make it relatable and to, introduce it in ways that apply to different scenarios and different moments. But you'll also notice that these videos are repetitive. And again, that speaks to the simplicity of silence. If I start to get very over-analytical, or if I start to present things that feel complex, then I'm moving away from the point. And so silence at its foundation is deeply simple. The next characteristic is that silence is connected rather than differentiated. And again, if we refer back to those axes of excellence and wholeness, it speaks to the fact that silence is a skill of wholeness. It allows us to feel part of something rather than differentiated as an individual. But even at a very basic level, silence is connected. Think about it this way. If you observe the smallest level of substance, scientists know that there's infinitely more space than there is matter. So that space is kind of a web of connectedness that's interrupted by tiny little points of substance. Similarly, our experience of silence is deeply connected. And then silence is also feminine as opposed to masculine. And let me clarify that this does not mean female as opposed to male. These characteristics are encouraged to be practiced by all types of humans. But in the same way that the moon is feminine and the sun is masculine, silence is feminine. It's receptive, it's soft, it's connected, as opposed to those more achievement pursuits that are associated with the energetic masculine. And so again, I'm here presenting as a human female about something deeply feminine. You do not have to be female in order to practice this, but silence is characteristically feminine at that energetic level. And so now I'm going to talk about the characteristics of silence that are more related to how we experience silence in our human lives. So first, silence is complementary and cooperative as opposed to competitive. And again, this is easy to see in these two different realms. In our pursuits of excellence, there's competition that's useful, that's necessary, because there's a need to be the winner. In the pursuits of wholeness, there's skillful and unskillful, but there's no winners and losers. It's not competitive, it's complementary and cooperative. But that also means that the silence skills don't compete with your pursuits of excellence. You don't need to give up your life. You don't need to kind of drop out in order to experience the skillfulness of silence. It complements your pursuit of excellence. It complements your differentiation. Kind of like that yin-yang symbol. And one way this shows up in people's healing journeys is that when they realize how pleasure-seeking and immature their egoic self is, they tend, and myself included, to kind of want to get rid of it altogether. They say, just, remove that from the situation altogether. I'll just live here in wholeness. And the reality is that wholeness is a complement to the pursuits of excellence. You can't escape from the needs of your world by pursuing these silence practices. They're always meant as kind of a refuge, a place to stabilize, a place to nourish, as you naturally are an egoic, excellence-seeking creature. And you can also tell this, in the infinite moments that you're gonna want to escape, that this practice of silence is almost like a bunker, a place where you can avoid everything that the world is requesting of you. And there's compassion to be extended to that feeling, because this world is aversive and challenging. But silence as a practice is less of a bunker, more of a home base, a place that you can come to and nourish and recover as you remind yourself the inevitability of kind of going back out into the world, going back out into that experience of being somebody. So again, it's a complement, not an escape. And then on a similar vein, silence is non-extreme. It doesn't live on the poles. It lives in the middle. And so if we, again, go back to what we just said, this desire for self-annihilation, kind of the ultimate nobodiness, the ultimate silence, that's unskillful because it sees silence as an extreme, as an outcome. And silence is not that. It's this middle ground that you're walking. And this is infinitely humbling as you actually practice it, because there's no point that you get to the perfect silence, and anytime that you think you've kind of figured it out, I've got it, you're just on one side of the pole, and then you're asked to come back to center. And so in that way, the discipline of silence is more of a discipline of balance. And next is how we experience silence. What does it feel like in our body and our mind when we are accessing silence? And so a good way to describe it is that it's grounded but spacious. The grounded part really encourages us to make the body a central part of the practice. And the term mindfulness can actually be really misleading on this front, because mindfulness makes it sounds like this is just in our mind, something that you think your way into, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. Mindfulness and silence practices are deeply rooted in the body. Because think about it, if it's about being present, if it's about being steady, if it's about being simple, the body is a much more effective place, a much more accessible place than this mind that we have that can go a million places and think a million infinite different outcomes. And so the body is where we actually anchor ourselves into. But it's not grounded in this kind of static and stuck way. It's grounded, but it's spacious. And you'll notice that as you do tune into your physical body, as you do calm your nervous system and feel more rooted into where you are, your mind has more room to breathe. It's less obsessive, it's less stuck, and more open, more flexible. It literally starts to feel like there's more of an open sky in your own mind. So to reiterate, the practice in a felt way feels grounded, but spacious. And lastly, the practice of skillful silence is deeply personal. As soon as you start to yell it at others, you miss the point. Even at a kind of globalized sense, it doesn't resonate with the mind to imagine the universalness of these practices. It's too lofty, it's too complex. Silence, as practiced in a real and authentic way, is just this small little window that you have access to. And so let me clarify that this is not my practice of silence. This is actually my practice of excellence. This is my pursuit of excellence, making these videos and articulating myself as skillfully as possible, sharing what I'm trained to share in a video format. My practice of silence is actually deeply personal, intimate, and not something that's open to being shared. Because again, the practice itself is deeply personal. It's just for you, not for you to kind of enforce onto others. And in that same vein, it's gentle. It's not forced. You can't force yourself into it, and you can't force others into it. These videos are meant to be invitational in nature. I'm inviting you to try these things out with no kind of emphasis that you should do it. In fact, saying you should meditate is paradoxical. It doesn't really make sense, because thinking about meditation, kind of, oh, I really should meditate, that will make my life better, that's not accessing silence. It's way simpler than that. You can access silence right here, right now, without a cushion, without a recording. It's gentle and it's personal.